لا يزال الخير حيا لا يزال إن في الدنيا سلاما وظلال.
Is where we draw the line between those kind of like fundamental principles, and then we go to the more intricate principles where, so in particular, I was talking to someone the other week and we were talking about circumcision, and he was talking about the Persian Empire and circumcision and how that basically arose and the origin of that. Now he said that basically the origin of circumcision in the Persian Empire was when the Persians took over their lot of empire, right? They would have people converting into the religion, because you knew there was a higher tax tariff for people who were non-Muslim than people who were Muslim. So it made sense financially for a lot of people to convert into Islam financially. Now for me, that doesn't necessarily say true faith. That says almost not necessarily a coercion, but an incentive kind of thing. And I don't necessarily think that's true faith in particular. So as a way of deterring people, this person basically promoted that for them to prove their allegiance to Islam, that they would have to get circumcised. And now we have a practice of circumcision that is rooted in many cultures, not just Islam, in African communities, in European communities, even in Judaic communities, that people have such sentimental value to these certain myths, which were geopolitical strategies back in the day, but are now so ingrained in our religion that we take it as gospel and key. So I want to have a talk to you today about certain superstitions and just opening the idea to deliberating within the Islamic community, because I feel like there's a lot of brothers out there who want to talk about subjects, want to open the platform for debate and whatever, but because of that fear of superstition and that fear of being a non-believer, that they take a step back, and it's almost unspeakable to be labeled as a liberal Muslim, right? When you don't have to be a liberal Muslim, you can just be a Muslim, thinking Muslim, an educated Muslim. You know, it doesn't have to have a label on it, and it doesn't have to be you straying away from the teachings. It's supposedly you trying to find the truth behind the teachings, and so and so, and confirming your belief, solidifying your knowledge, and solidifying your faith. Now, obviously, a lot of people will say, well, if you believe, then you should just believe. Faith should just be faith on its own. But I know in particular with certain religious leaders, or even prophets, they were given, I can't remember what the Arabic name is for it, but it's the proofs by Allah. They were given the proofs in order to convince people that he's not a fake and he's coming with a message from Allah. So I want to talk to you about superstitions and how you feel about there's certain taboo subjects within the Islamic community that are kept under key and chain by this culture of superstition.
I think when we talk about anything that has connotations attached to it, we need to understand where the connotations are actually coming from. So when we use the word superstition in the English language, usually we're referring to some kind of magical, otherwise extra rational recourse or discourse. So sometimes when we talk about witchcraft, for example, superstition is one of those words that we use to describe it. Obviously now, the post-enlightened West, when it looks back at, for example, the reign of James I or James VI of Scotland, he's the same person, from 1606 onwards. I mean, his campaign against witchcraft and these things, I always looked, I would say in a way anachronistically. So we look at kind of the way we look at things now, post-enlightenment, scientific discourse, and superimpose that on, for instance, the Tudor and post-Tudor period of time. So, like, it depends on what we mean by superstition. So that's one thing. The second thing you said, which is very interesting, which I think is worth talking about, really, is talking about liberal Islam or liberal Muslims, or some say call themselves feminist. You're talking about feminist Muslims and these kinds of labels, right? And what I would say is that the extent to which one could identify or agree with those political philosophies / ideologies is the extent to which they would agree with Islam.
Of course.
If those individuals who claim to be Muslims believe in the premise that actually Islam is not just a man-made religion, it's actually something from God, it's something from the all-knowing, it's from the all-wise, it's from the all-powerful.
Of course.
So if that's the premise they're running by, you have to think about all of the injunctions, the prescriptions, the do's and the don'ts,
of course,
from the Quran and the Sunnah as branches from the proverbial tree. The core of the tree, the root of the tree, are the principles, the overriding universal principles which underpin the religion of Islam. which include things like, obviously at the core of it, Tawheed, the idea of one God, believing in one God, submission to one God, and these things there. So, and obviously the evidences of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and the Sunnah and these things. So one is convinced epistemologically with the fact that Islam is truth, with a capital T, and that it comes from God, then that constitutes the root of the tree. The branches of the tree then become the injunctions which become almost automatically subscribed to. Because we think, okay, well, human beings have X amount of ways of structuring societies aforetime, presently, and continually. So if that's the case, who knows best on how to structure society, how individuals should live in a familial context, how a family should live in a societal context, and so on and so forth, how governments should run. So the Islamic answer would be, God knows best. Allahu A'lam, we would say, God knows best. So if that's the case, and then it makes sense for us to use Quran as the ultimate barometer, by which and through which we assess all of those other political philosophies, including liberalism, feminism, etc., and wherein which they differ with the Quranic discourse and the Islamic discourse, we would reject them. Now, why I find it sometimes contradictory for someone to identify themselves as a liberal Muslim, and here when I talk about liberalism, I'm talking about the political philosophy, or a feminist Muslim, and here once again, I'm talking about the political philosophy, is because the scholastic traditions that are associated with those respective political philosophies, for example, are not always in contradistinction with the Quranic and Islamic narrative. I feel like at one point there has to be compromise. Like the Quran says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. They wish that you can compromise so that they can compromise with you.
Of course.
So the Quran says
This is it, yeah.
Exactly, right. So you compromise with them, and you will compromise with you compromise with them. So there is a mutual compromise, which Islam at the base level doesn't allow. In fact, it criticizes.
It does, yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to kind of choose the direction you want to live your life in. You can't be pulled apart.
Oh no, I was putting my hand. I like,
you know what I mean?
Go.
You can't be pulled apart. And in psychology, the people that actually live like that are associated with something called cognitive dissonance. So for me, and that's why I made recently, I got a Twitter account. I'm just kind of putting quotes there, you know. I put a Twitter post recently, a tweet. It's a cool tweet, yeah? I'm new to the thing, right?
I haven't got one, so I wouldn't even know.
I'm very new to it myself. So I was saying that I put a tweet that so-called feminist Muslims are either uninformed or unsatisfied with either Islam or feminism respectively, right? That's the situation. Because, for instance, when we talk about inheritance, if we look at the scholastic tradition, the inheritance laws in the Quran would not be in contradistinction with the feminist narrative. The so-called patriarchal narrative of the feminists would not be in contradistinction with the family unit and the fact that the father is, has these rights and the mother has these rights in Islam and the husband has these rights in Islam. So you have to make a compromise, or you have to falsify your belief. You have to fake your belief. You have to pretend that you believe in something when you don't actually believe in something. Or you have to superimpose a narrative on one of those things. So you either superimpose an Islamic narrative on the feminist discourse, or vice versa.
See, I feel like you're in danger of doing exactly what you accuse other people of doing, and this is where I think we need to draw a conclusion, just so that, like you said, there can be a compromise on both sides, so that we can build a bridge together and work together. So obviously, I'll start off with the first thing, because you said a few things, which is really good. Like with the superstition thing, yes, there is a leniency to excusing it to mumbo jumbo, superstition and supernatural, whatever. But if we look at it historically and factually, superstitions were actually certain things that were made to be supernatural and uncontrollable by human beings in order to deter any behavior within that within that environment. I'll give you the mummy's tombs curse, for example, right? Why do we have the mummy's tombs curse? We have the mummy's tombs curse because people were trying to excavate the pyramids at the time, but you had a lot of pyramid robbers basically taking the gold and all the riches of the pharaohs back when. Now historically that's not good, because that's evidence that they're taking historically from us. So they made up this myth, right, of the superstitious mummy's curse to keep people away from that, and it worked very well. And it's the same with aliens, right? We have a civilization of supposedly white supremacy who love to speak about aliens, especially when it comes to foreign works of architecture. Like they'll often say the aliens built the pyramids. The aliens didn't build the pyramids. They're just scared to admit that black people built the pyramids or Africans built the pyramids, because it takes away their valid reason of supposedly enslaving subhuman human beings. So when we're talking about superstition, yes, there's that side of paranormal activity, if you've ever seen the film, but then there's also the real side of politically.
How would you define superstition?
For me, I use superstition as the word, in particular in this case, in the sense that a subject is not necessarily something that you should delve into, right? Because it may lead you astray, or you may do something
Say
wrong.
that again. So
Superstition for me, like you said, there's the paranormal extra movie, the dramatized Hollywood version that you
but
want to.
what is, like, when you say paranormal?
Yeah.
So once again, because the thing is,
Uncontrollable by human behavior or human power.
so most things which, in that definition of superstition, which are unexplainable by human beings, would be your definition superstitious.
Yeah.
For example, quantum mechanics. Is that superstitious?
It would have been superstitious back in the day, and you probably would have been executed for talking about it.
No, but today.
Yeah,
'Cause
now,
we can't
but we
explain
move.
it.
But this is the thing: we have more science and we have more books to actually educate. Back in the day, people could not read. Reading was only reserved for the liberal elite or the elite in general.
No, but the
meaning
point,
that.
sorry, just,
Yeah, go on, go on.
sorry,
Go on.
sorry,
No, go ahead. I just wanted to say, in particular, you had people that could not read. So getting this information was not easy for them, and they saw it as works of the extraordinary. And this is why you had the Salem witch trials and the.
That's why definitions are very important.
They are very important.
So if we define superstition as that which we can't explain.
Yeah.
Now, if we do a double split experiment,
Not necessarily
with
that
a
we
wave
can't
and a
explain.
particle, and you know what I'm saying, we shoot an electron,
Yeah.
you know, and we put a split in a slit in the middle like that, and we see how does it react in certain conditions. We'll find that all of the laws of formal logic are completely suspended in that situation.
Right.
Literally, what's happening is magic.
Yep.
So on a quantum level, we don't know why that is happening.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know yet, but the point is we don't know. We don't know.
But this is the thing. This is the thing.
So,
you need to realize.
So
science-
is that superstitious?
No, no, because here's the thing: we have the tools to measure, observe, and assess that, and gather the knowledge after the event has happened. That's how things happen.
So what is
things happen?
Yeah.
We assess it, we observe, we measure, and then we study it after, and that's where the information comes.
Right.
Information never really,
So it follows
rarely ever comes.
the scientific method, but I'm still asking, so how would you define superstition?
So what I'm trying to say is there's a difference between superstition of the Hollywood kind, where everything is superly unexplainable, and there's a superstition that we can explain, which is supposed to be a deterrent for certain people
but
to
that
keep
we
away
can't
from their
explain.
behavior. But we can
Do you know,
explain.
now let me ask you a question. You know, this is a serious question.
Yeah, go on.
Do you know the double split experiment? Yeah? I'm not sure if are you aware of this
No,
experiment? I'm not a quantum physicist.
No,
I'm
neither am I.
Yeah. All right, but this is my understanding of the experiment. Okay?
Yeah.
You put two slits, yeah, and then you shoot an electron or an atom or something, yeah.
Okay.
You shoot it with like a gun that shoots the thing. Now, if you shoot it in the first instance, it will act like basically it won't act like a particle, it will act like a wave.
Okay.
Yeah, it will act like a wave.
When you say a wave, how do you observe that it acts like a wave?
So a wave, if you look at, this is a very difficult thing to explain without anything,
obviously,
without
because a
without
particle-
illustration.
a particle
But
can
a
hit
wave, for
something.
example, look at light. Light and sound are two interesting examples of
Yeah.
waves. The way waves work is that, for example, if I shine a torch on a black wall, the way it's going to illuminate on the wall is going to be like, it's going to cover the wall with light, yeah? So it's going to be like a wave effect.
There's a lot of factors there.
Right, if you put a split in the middle,
Yeah.
if you put like a little, let's say a hole in the middle of it, you got a hole
the
now.
hole- of
Yeah,
the
you
wall?
got a hole, and you got a torch. You're still gonna have light on the other side, yeah. Whereas if you have like let's say pellets,
Yeah.
and you shoot it through, it's gonna
Okay,
go
yeah.
only in one direction. You're
Yeah.
only gonna see one bit,
Yeah.
which has got. So a particle acts differently to a wave.
Yeah, I
The
understand.
point is, when you do a double split experiment, you realize that the particle, which we think is a particle, the electron, or in
Yeah.
this case the atom, whatever it may be, when you shoot it through the double split, it acts like we think it acts like a particle, but it acts like a wave. So this is where it becomes even more wacky. It's become superstitious.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. You know, this is serious stuff. Go into any, I mean,
No,
this
I
is not me
understand.
just saying this. Now, if you put observational devices, like
Yeah.
for example, cameras, detectors,
Yeah.
so that we see exactly what's happening when it goes through the split. The electron acts differently,
Yeah.
as if it knows what's going on.
Of course.
Now we know that atoms and electrons are not animate things.
All right.
We know that they're inanimate, right? They don't have a brain, they don't have a nucleus, they don't have a mind, they don't have knowledge. No, we know that. I mean, from science, they're not in the realm of biology.
I think generally when you say they have no minds, they have no thing or whatever, you need to remember atoms and electrons, they move.
They don't have any.
In comparison,
maybe you're right.
to stuff like stones or whatever.
Fine. Let's
So
not say mind.
They have natural order. They have natural.
No,
kind
I
of like
accept it, but
natural
they don't
dynamics.
have a nucleus.
But what I'm trying, yeah,
They don't have a brain. They're not biology.
They don't
It's-
necessarily have a processing system the same way we
Perfect.
do. Fair enough.
So it's not biology, it's physics, yeah?
Yeah.
So here, why does it act like biology? Why does it act like it knows what it's doing when you're observing it? These are questions which have baffled quantum physicists. Literally, if I were to be, now if I forget about being a physicist, if I were to come in the garb of a magician, and I did the double split experiment, not as a scientist, but as a magician, everyone would describe what I'm doing as magic. Say, look, there's this kind of optical illusion, there's some kind of trickery going on. Now, the point I'm making is this, is that in the New Age scientific post-enlightenment, post-colonial discourse, now it is a post-colonial discourse.
We have to be very careful. What I'm trying to say, I actually agree with you. But the thing is, I feel like you're in danger of conflating all colonial science with just science in general. Just because science over here has advanced, it doesn't mean that they're all trying to enforce that knowledge onto other things.
And that's not my point. Now, what I'm saying is that when someone packages something in scientific jargon and terminology, it becomes more digestible for the masses, even if it's unexplainable on every level. Like this particular example.
Which is what I said earlier,
so the point I'm making to you is superstition is become a loaded term with deep connotations, which, in my opinion, new atheists like to use to try and target basically theists. So we don't want to fall into narrative. Now that's the point I'm making to you. Just because something is scientific, it doesn't mean it's devoid. It's completely, in a sense, non-falsifiable.
Of course.
You know, and that's the whole nature of science in the first place.
But even then, even if we're talking about atheists and theists, right, you need to understand that the main thing that atheists don't understand is that the whole point of religion is that it's based on faith anyway. That's the core of it.
And so
it's
science.
based on faith. Exactly.
In many ways,
that's what I'm saying. Atheists completely forget that point, meaning that whether or not there's proof or falsifiable evidence, the whole point is that you believe. That's the faith. That's the point of religion, and I think that's what a lot of atheists miss. But again, this is what I'm trying to say. I feel like we're trying to build bridges here, but the problem is you're conflating two different groups of people into one mass, which is basically kind of like almost attacking Islam. But the problem is, what we need to do is we need to build a bridge of understanding and a bridge of knowledge as well, from what we understand to what you understand and so on. Because if we keep doing this thing where it's a thing of New Age science is just trying to attack Islam, we're never gonna get
to attack black people. Just 20, 30 years. Look at eugenics. For example, look at the program in because the thing is, we have to have one consistent way of dealing with scientific discourse. Look at, for example, how the Nazis were using science, right?
I just wanted to quickly. When we're talking about science, we're talking about two very different people in science. When we talk about eugenics, anyone who knows science from its key stage 3 science, right, knows that eugenics is such a futile way of looking at life because it brings down basically the survival of humanity into one specific factor. It's completely futile. It doesn't take into account natural nurture versus nature. It doesn't take into account environmental factors. It doesn't take into account a person's upbringing. It doesn't take into account many factors.
No, I'm not
no, I understand that. But when we're talking about science, you need to remember there are different communities of the scientific community that do understand there are people that can believe, but also want to be able to explore the beliefs of certain people, the context of certain people. Now, you said in particular that when we look back historically at the rules of King Henry VIII and so on, blah, blah, and we supposedly have the science of now. We cannot look in judgment retrospectively, and I completely agree with that. But the only problem is, what we're trying to say is no one's looking back in judgment retrospectively. People are looking back historically at certain things that are myths, certain things that are geopolitical.
How do you define a myth?
How do I define a myth? Something that is common knowledge but not really proven.
Okay, so something which is unproven is false.
Yeah.
That's not correct. That's called the argument of ignorance.
For
example, we didn't know that Neptune existed for maybe 1,300 years. Neptune, the planet.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So Isaac Newton, he using his own physics, he kind of inferred the existence of Neptune.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that was confirmed through observations thereafter. But just because we don't know that Neptune exists, or we can't see Neptune, it doesn't mean that Neptune is not there.
But this is exactly my
Just because something is unprovable, unproven, it doesn't mean it's not true.
But this is my point. I completely agree with that stance. What I'm trying to say in particular, where we have proof historically, right, that certain geopolitical actions were used as a way of keeping control of your diaspora or your population or your demographic in general, right? we then look to certain teachings and realize that it's become more cultural and more religious and more sentimental along the way. I'll give you a fair example nowadays. We talk about modesty, right? We talk about modesty in Islam. We have so many sisters around here, I'm not going to point at everyone, but we have so many sisters around here who are dressed very modestly. And we can see that that's not only affected them in a positive light, in the sense that we have more Islamic sisters who are educated now than we have Islamic boys. But at the same time, I would then point to yourself, who's wearing a vest on, right, and showing your very aesthetic arms. And I show, no, that's a good thing. You should be comfortable in your sexuality.
It's not nothing to do with sexuality, my friend. But I've got a bit of Mandi deficiency.
No, understandably.
I like the sun.
No, understandably.
But it's also Islamically.
But this is what I'm trying to say. Like when we talk about that, there may be women with vitamin D deficiency as well.
Yeah, they do. There are a lot of them do.
So is it then, from what we know, appropriate for them to be wearing something that completely covers?
Do you agree with the premise that things which are identical should be treated equally?
When you say things that should be identical, you have to point that out.
So, for example,
rights
let's look at it mathematically, right? 2 is equivalent to 4 is equivalent to 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Okay, yeah.
Accepted?
Yeah.
So mathematically they have the same value, yeah? Okay, so they should be treated equally. So if you wanted to times or minus or divide, 2 plus 2 equals 2 plus 2. It's the same thing as what you would do with 4.
Of course.
Okay. So we accept fundamentally that something which is identical should be treated equally.
Yeah.
Are men and women identical?
Not necessarily.
So should they be treated equally?
Of course.
In every sense?
We're talking about human rights. Wait. One second. I don't want anyone.
Let me rebrand the question.
Go on.
Sorry. Should they be treated absolutely equally?
Now, when we say absolutely equally, right? Yeah. We're talking about particular in what sense? I'm talking about on a human rights part, and I'm talking about in general as a possibility of living as human beings.
No, because I'm saying, look.
Go on.
Because you have to understand that when we talk about logical, this is almost a logical deduction, right?
No, it's a false logical deduction.
You can come forward and we can talk. Let me come in, please.
Bro.
If we say
trying to build bridges.
if we say that things which are identical should be treated equally.
Of course.
For example, let me give you an easy example, and this is something, by the way, to his credit, I refuted him last week, but this week I'm going to say something to his credit. Jordan Peterson, he mentions all the time, which is the idea of hierarchies. I'll tell you something about it. You might not like him, but the idea is this: if you have a situation, you're going on a bus. This is my example. You're going on a bus. You see, when the red bus here, it opens its doors. You know what happens?
What happens?
If there's someone with a buggy or someone with a wheelchair, they put the ramp down so that they can be facilitated and go into the thing.
Of course.
Now, if you look at most institutions now, it's actually it's encoded within the law that this disability access has to be available for disabled people. My question to you is, do you accept the fact that disabled people should have advantages over non-disabled people in the context of society?
This is where the argument gets really reductionist, because you then forget that disabled people have a condition that naturally shouldn't really exist, thus impairing them from living a normal life like a normal human being.
But that's beside the point.
No. It's actually the point. Because when we talk about human rights and we talk about equality, we talk about trying to bring about an equal amount of opportunity for everyone. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean an equal thing of outcome.
Yes.
But right now we're talking about an equal sense of opportunity.
Perfect.
So when we're talking about disabled people and we're talking about people with certain conditions, even now when we're talking about men and women, you need to look back historically as to why men are built the way they are, and how environmental factors have added to the brute strength of men now, and the ability to provide. That's not necessarily.
I would say that there's more to do with biology with that.
Oh, there's a lot to do with evolutionary biology, because you need to go back.
Depends on how you define it.
You need to remember what we have now is a product of millions of years of evolution.
Okay.
And because of those millions of years of evolution,
so you're an evolutionist.
There's a complete separate between men and women, and we can see evolution. We can see evolution.
Can I ask you a question? Herbert Spencer talked about social evolution. It's interesting because it links perfectly to the idea of hierarchies and pre-existence. Whether you accept the theory of human evolution or not. If you're citing now what seems to be a Spencerian social evolution kind of rationale, I would say to you that look, if you accept that there's a, for example, if you're a feminist or you believe that there should be equality in the way that, an absolute equality in everything that men and women do, then I could turn around and say to you, well, look at it from a Herbert Spencerian evolutionary perspective. If there is a patriarchy, then that's a natural patriarchy because it's the survival of the fitter. And who is the fitter? Now it's the man, because now he put himself in a patriarchal position. If that's the case, then that's the natural order of things. So I would say to you, look, it depends on how you want to frame this anyway. Any epistemological way you want to root this, I'll say the same thing. If we're not exactly the same, the point is this, and this is exactly what Simone de Beauvoir, she wrote in her book in the second chapter of biology. I always cite this because I reckon it's the point of demarcation when we talk about feminists, yeah? She acknowledges full well that there are biological differences between men and women.
Yeah, of course.
And she realizes that they're not the same, just like you do, right? But what she says is despite the difference, there should be absolute equality. That's what she says. That's her argument. My question is, if you believe in the same thing, which seems to be that it is like that.
I've already distinguished it, so let's not put me in that same
No,
bracket.
but if you believe that despite biological, physiological, psychological, emotional differences between men and women, there should be equality at every single level.
What divides,
the question is why?
What divides men and women for you? That's the problem. Because right now, what divides men and women for you? Because right now, I've basically demonstrated just how environmental factors, climate change, or whatever you want to call it, all of the natural selection pressures are to blame for the way we are right now. The way we look, the way we eat, the way we drink, even our culture.
But that's the side.
No. It's absolutely all enticing. All enticing. You cannot reduce the argument to just simply men and women are different. Without taking
why
into
not?
Because you have to take into the reasons as to why they're different.
But even that's
so
not.
even if we're talking even if we're talking, because this is a very important point. Because when we're talking about even now the difference between men and women, right? You need to remember the reason there's a patriarchal system is because before the working world and post-modern and post-industrial whatever, there weren't safe working places for women. The death toll was high. You know, the work safety was not a thing. Human rights was not a thing. So for most people, it made sense for the woman who, if she falls pregnant, has 9 months of carrying a baby. So it makes no legitimate sense for her to be out there working in such dangerous conditions if she's holding a child. So now that's a natural thing. That's a very natural thing. We are now moving forward into the day and age where work safety is a lot better. Women have the opportunity to go into these workplaces, and they feel a lot safer to go into these workplaces.
Which ones? Because if
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Which ones? Which one? Rajib. That's fair enough. No, we can get into the discussion about which decisions women choose, and we can get into that thing. But don't let that derail from the point that there are now places that women can work, can be 9 months pregnant, and it will not, right, disadvantage the development.
My argument is not that they shouldn't work.
I understand, but it should not. It's basically they can now work in a place that doesn't disadvantage the development of a child.
Okay.
Right? And the whole point is that it's not that we're different. We're working towards one entity, which is the child. Do you not agree?
No, I don't see that this is the question I asked you. Which, no, I accept all the points you just said. I'm just saying, like. But here, that point you just made, I agree with it totally, no problem. Yeah. And you should have prefaced it by saying, I would say, just to be a bit more meticulous in the wording, right? In many.
You've been attacked too much.
No. In many workplace environments, women now have an enhanced safety because obviously mining is not like that. The military is not like that. You know, in different construction. Even look how many women garbage cleaners there are comparative to men. And the sewage women. Like, so here, what we have to do is that, so when we talk about the thing, this is the primary question, right? Forget about religion now. Let's put religion to the side, right? Let's put religion to the side, okay? For the moment. Now I'm just going to cite the law of comparative advantage. If you're saying that what you would prefer in a society is, would you agree?
I haven't said anything, so you're not.
Would you agree that what's preferred in society is those with the best particular, let's say for example, skills are able to, in a society premised with meritocracy, that they will be able to, for example, supply those particular skills to end users?
I have to disagree. This is again a very reductionist argument. It's the idea that it's
premised
similar.
on
No, I
meritocracy.
understand. But it's the idea and the fallacy of, like, say, communism in particular, that if you have a certain group of people who are more skilled at this thing, that they should automatically go into this thing.
I think the communists will say the opposite.
Yeah. Well, they need to read. But in particular, we tend to funnel this idea that because men are better workers, then they should be all.
No, but this is not what I've said.
I haven't said anything that you completely said that I've inferred. So this is just inferred. All right. But when we're talking about, in particular, men going to certain places, you see now there's a backlash in men, right? Because they've been forced into these workplaces. They've been forced into these traditional roles, supposedly, right? And a lot of the time
How do you
nowadays,
define traditional?
wait. Nowadays, providing. Providing, sheltering, whatever you want to call it.
It's only traditional because now you look, once again, it's anachronistic. So you look, I'm sorry, but I do feel a lot of the discussion that we're having now is rested upon this post-colonial narrative of now we're liberal, now we're feminist, now we're X, now we're Y, Z. We look back retrospectively and everything is traditional.
This is the problem, and this is what I want to approach you in particular. It's because right now, I'm not one of those guys, and this is why I said you have to separate those kind of scientific communities in particular. There are people, like you said, the eugenics, right? They thought that the size of your cranium basically determines the size of your brain, and it determines the size of your intellect, right? They dropped that as soon as they found out the Arabs had larger cranium sizes on average, right? So you have a certain amount of people who want science to basically flatten them, but then you have a certain amount of people who want science, history, and whatever to help better the situation that we are in. And even now, when we talk about, say, Arab societies and whatever, right? We talk about it in a patriarchal sense, right? I would not dramatize it to be that patriarchal. But right now, to be an Arab man, it is very convenient in comparison to being an Arab female. When we're talking about, in particular, let's talk about the right to marry and so on. So the reason that men have more of a polygamy entitlement or more of a polygamy claim is because women traditionally haven't had the ability to work. So the reason certain men in the past,
I don't know about that because it depends on what kind of work we're talking about.
Because again, the reason in the past certain men were able to marry more than one woman is because they could financially provide for them. It wasn't out of sexual lust. It wasn't out of even love. It wasn't even out of interest.
Once again, we have to go to our premise because I've asked you this question a few times. So I would like an answer.
Okay, go on.
Right? The question always rests on the naturalistic premise. Okay, so we're saying that we both agree that men and women are not identical in their physiologies, psychologies, or their biologies, right? Now, what I'm saying to you, and I'd love to ask anyone this, to you, if we agree with the premise that identical things should be treated equally and that men and women are not identical, there should be a therefore there, it's a deduction. Therefore, men and women should not be treated absolutely equally. So for example, right, and this is why I think there is a fallacy in the feministic argument, because when feminists on the one hand, they argue for equal outcomes, equal opportunities for me is not that controversial. I'm not talking about equal opportunities. I agree that there should be to a greater extent than not.
Should we not concentrate on that as opposed to something that we both have said that it's not really a thing?
To a greater extent, but there are exceptions to the rule. Like for example, the situation in America, where the firefighters in America had to go through a whole they do like a physical challenge, they do it in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And the feminists campaigned against them. And because men are faster and stronger than women, as can be noticed by almost every sport that they partake in, we've got almost no controversy whatsoever. No controversy whatsoever.
I'll give you an example. You say that men...
No, let me just finish, sorry, I finish the sentence. I just want to say that because of the feminists rallying the firefighting professionals and saying that we don't want this, what's happened is that they've had to, the course that they would have to do, the physical course, that would have taken, let's say, 10 minutes. They've had to add, let's say, a minute to it. Why? So that they can be more inclusive of women. Now the question is, if there is a burning building, who would you want to save you? A woman that could come 30 seconds later, or a man that will come 30 seconds earlier will save your life? I believe you, the biggest feminists in the building would want a man to come, even if it means admission that in this situation we don't want equality or opportunity or outcome. So this is just one specialized example. I'm not saying society is filled with those examples, but this is an exacerbated example of a situation where it's very clear that men have an advantage over women, and a non-recognition of this is tantamount to life and death. So this is where feminism can lead to death. Now, the point I'm making to you is, we have to look, because you're a man of science and you talk about empiricism and rationalism and these things, if we look holistically, and once again, what is the most effective and efficient thing for an economy, we have to take into consideration those factors. Once again, feminists don't, and this is the argument of Warren Farron. He says that they don't take into consideration the fact that men have been conscripted into the armies for maybe 10 for the whole of American history. There's been male conscription. There has never been female conscription. If we want to equalize the historical problem of patriarchal society, what we're going to need to do is conscribe women to an army for the same amount of times that we've conscribed men to the army. So if we want equality, now we have to get women drafted, forced into being in an army, drafted and forced into being in an army the same amount of times that men have been in the past. But this argument, this is why it's a fallacious argument, and it's premised on a false premise. And the premise is, despite the naturalistic, despite the natural differences, we should have the, equality in every level. And I'm saying to you that doesn't make any sense. If we accept the premise that identical things should be treated equally, and we identify that women are not identical to men, then there must be a space, at least in some instances, where women will be treated differently to men. That's why we have maternity leave. That's why we have so many things society has put in place for women. That's why in emergencies, women and children are taken out first before men, because it's assumed men are more physically self-sufficient, and rightfully, in my opinion, assumed that men are more physically self-sufficient than women. That's why men have been drafted into the armies, and that's why women have been able to enjoy the privilege of being protected by male military men for almost all of civilization cross-culturally. So we can't have our cake and eat it both. We can't say we want equality of outcome and opportunity, but at the same time have these exceptions which feminists put in place, you see, which of course entitle them to things which are otherwise not.
Then this is what I'm trying to say. Your argument is reductionist. And when I say reductionist, I say that I understand, but I say it in the sweetest sense, right? I understand you come from a standpoint where there's a lot of colonial imperialist science that has been enforced on the Middle East as if it's the highest standard. I'm coming to say that, in particular, that's not the case. We can work together, kind of thing. Because I feel like there's a lot of conservative values that the Middle East and certain Arab countries have that the West has lost. Now, that would be a nice middle to come into discussing those differences, and we can meet in the middle of that. But the only problem I have to say is that when it comes to talking to Muslims in particular, that it becomes a very reductionist argument in the sense that, like you say, there's a difference between men and women. I'll ask you a simple question. Can you name me a white sprinter faster than any black female sprinter?
That's why I say to you that I've always made the argument, I've made this on camera as well, that actually this is the fallacy of the West. Because if you look at the sprinters, and for example, black sprinters, they have consistently outperformed white sprinters for the last 100 years. Now, that's
why is that?
Because they're not equal.
No. But this is what I'm trying to say.
Black sprinters and white sprinters are not equal.
Well, you got to be fair.
They're not.
No, I understand. But
black
why
sprinters
is
are faster.
that? But we know why
Genetically.
that is. We know why that is.
Genetics.
You can't just say genetically though.
Yes,
why? Why
but
is
I think sometimes
what is passed on in their genetics?
Let me tell you.
Faster?
No, lots of things. That's why the same thing applies now when you talk about black swimmers versus white swimmers.
Yeah.
Right? So the thing is, you have to understand. Look at Eastern Europe. Sorry, but look at Eastern Africa.
I'm just saying, you've got to be fair and you've got to build a bridge with me, right? You've got to build a bridge. You've got to allow me to come into the middle. What I'm trying to say in particular is that you see where we get into a reductionist argument. The reason in particular there's more faster black female sprinters than there are white male sprinters, which should be a contradiction to this whole thing.
I don't know if about that. I don't think that's correct.
Can you name one?
No. The male sprinters are faster than black
swimmers. Can you name a black swimmer? Black male swimmer that is faster than a female swimmer. So what I'm trying to say is there are certain environmental factors and certain cultural differences that over time have bred certain differences. And that has nothing to do with man or woman or whatever. That has more to do. But but it has everything to do with the environment, it has everything to do with culture, it has everything to do with nurturing. There's so much to this argument that we need to take into consideration. So what I'm trying to say in particular, when we talk about men and women and their equal rights, right? We're trying to say an equal right of opportunity, because we've seen that there's different factors.
What about in the firefight?
Wait. I'll get onto that. We've seen that when given different environments and different selection pressures, human beings, whether you're man or woman, come out completely different people.
I know
they come out completely different. We need to remember, when we talk about all of these things, we need to take all of these things into consideration.
But you know what you've just applied?
It's very similar. Give me two seconds. It's very similar to the whole kind of like debate that we have in America about black privilege, white privilege, and whatever, so on and so. No one takes into consideration the historical benefits that white people got that black people didn't, allowing them to start their race a lot sooner than black people. But now people complain as to why we're so behind. What I'm trying to say is people don't realize the historical effect of that. And what I'm trying to say in particular is that when So what I'm trying to say is, when we're talking about, say, any kind of deliberation in Islam, that's what I want. I want that bridge where you don't feel like we're attacking or anything like that.
For sure. I think this is fruitful. I want to say two things though. Like,
yeah, go on.
There's two things. You said that the argument is reductionist, and then you said that there's a lot of factors that come into it. Now,
let's not get too heated about buzzwords.
No, I'm just trying to smooth out potential consistency. What I'll say is this. First and foremost, what you seem to have applied is genetic fallacy. Just because something has come from a certain place,
of course,
it doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Of course,
So the fact that, for example, men have been advantaged, if we take that premise true, and it is true in some contexts.
But it's not something they control.
So the fact that that is the case doesn't change the reality, the sociological reality.